Hello, and welcome to Social Media Management for Beginners. You can check out the playlist down below to catch up on previous episodes, but today I wanted to talk about the different working styles that are available as a social media manager or for social media managers. And I wanted to talk about this today because I think there is sometimes this misconception, I guess, partially because of what I portray here on my YouTube channel, that the only way to be a social media manager is to own your own business and be a freelancer. And that is the way that I choose to do it today, but I actually have worked in 3 different working styles and I've loved them all. And I've hated aspects of them all. So we're going to talk about what you need to know to get started as a social media manager and how to decide on the working style that is right for you. So first off, we talked about this already. One of the most common ways or most known ways, at least on the internet, to become a social media manager is to work for yourself as a freelancer. Being a freelancer means that you are employed by yourself at the end of the day. You're a contract worker or a 1099 worker for a different company. And they would typically hire you by package or by hour. I recommend pricing by packages. So they might say, hey, I need a 5 post a week social media plan from you. You schedule the content for them. You might have a meeting every month or every week, depending on your package and which you really like. But as you can see, freelancing, there are not a ton of rules. It really is owning your own business, and you are the one deciding how much you're meeting with your clients, how much you're posting for your clients, what the processes are, and so on and so forth, which can be really good, but it can also be really stressful. And we'll come back and talk about that when we talk about pros and cons. The next working style is full-time, as I sometimes call it, or maybe an in-house social media management role. So what that means is that you are actually employed by the company, typically either full-time or part-time, but you are a W-2 worker, just like a traditional, employer. If you worked at a corporate job or if you worked at the mall before and you get a paycheck, they take the taxes out for you. That is what I mean by in-house. And what this means is that you will be managing the social media of that account. So for example, I worked in-house for a staffing company. That was my last full-time corporate job. I was responsible for essentially growing that brand, actually working at their corporate headquarters. Typically, it's a full-time role. Like I said, sometimes it might be a part-time role, or you might even get a social media internship doing this, but you are there to promote that brand. You work for that brand, you get a paycheck from that brand. And then the last working style that there is agency work. And this could either be you working for an agency, or it could mean that you open your own agency once you freelance for a while, or maybe you want to do it right now. So an agency is a little bit of a different model in that they are kind of similar to a freelancer, except they're a big company. They've got lots of different employees. It's not just a single freelancer, and they work for lots of different companies. I worked for an agency. That was my first social media management job, or actually it was social media copywriting was my first gig. And that agency specialized in working with CRM companies, kind of random, and senior living communities. Again, kind of random, but those were my first jobs, really. And so I wrote tweets at that time. I was writing tweets for these different companies, and I would get a batch of different work every month for the agency. So I was responsible for lots of different brands and lots of different projects, but I was paid by the agency. I was not paid by those senior living companies or CRM companies. I was paid by the agency as an employee. Okay, so let's talk about how one would get one of these jobs. So for me, I'll start in the order that I actually worked these jobs. Like I said, my first social media job was at an agency. And I got that job on Upwork. Back then it was called something different, but today it's called Upwork. I was just searching online for work from home jobs. I was a retail manager at the time, and I was also in college. And so I was just looking for ways to make more money. And I figured, I have a computer. I know the internet pretty well. I had always been really involved in blogging and, just like dabbling on the internet. I knew I was a decently strong writer because that was a passion of mine and an interest of mine. And so I was like, how can I piece together these skills and get a job that I can do from home? And so I found that gig on Upwork. I applied for it. I used my blog content as a portfolio, which is something that you're going to need for any of these job types, okay? A portfolio is essentially going to be a resume for a social media manager, but it's done in a little bit of a different style. It's typically more visual, where you're actually showing examples of work that you've done. You're showing results of work that you've created, and it's there in addition to a resume or in place of for some of these job types. So for me, my portfolio was my own work that I had done for myself. That's all I really had. It would have been great if I would have had CRM examples or senior living examples, but I didn't. So I just showed off my blogs and said, hey, I can write. Let me write some tweets for you. I'm not going to get too deep into portfolios and what all needs to go into them in this video, but if you want more information on that, I want to invite you to a workshop that I've got all about social media management portfolios. I'm going to leave the link for that down below because, like I said, a portfolio is going to be something that you need whether you want a full-time job, an agency job, a freelance job, even like UGC or content creation nowadays. So please come. There'll be a free template there for you, a full run through of what a social media manager portfolio needs in it, how to get that experience, and so much more. Okay, so that's how I got the first agency job. Then from there, how I got my first full-time social media management job was, again, that portfolio. I continued to build my portfolio over the years. So I made sure to take screenshots of the work that I was doing at that agency. I made sure to save blog posts that I wrote and things like that, even though that's not technically social media manager work, it was marketing experience. And I put those things together in a portfolio and I applied for full-time jobs. Now, my first full-time in-house job actually wasn't as a social media manager. I got a job at General Motors as a marketing support type of role. So it was in the marketing lane, if you will, but it was not directly managing social media pages. But even still, put all of that experience into your portfolio because let me tell you, I learned so much about selling, about marketing, about websites, about, social media customer service and things like that from working that job. So I still obviously use that experience. I put that on my resume, I put that on my LinkedIn, and I put work from that into, again, my portfolio. So for a full-time in-house job, you're typically going to need both of those things. You're going to need a portfolio and a resume. And I'm pretty sure for my first agency job, I also submitted a resume because, you're getting a, traditional employee type of gig. So that's how I got that. And then from there, after working at that job, I was able to get my first full-time social media management job. Freelancing. Now, I continued to freelance the whole time that I was working in-house in my in-house social media management job, honestly, just because I wanted to. But this is advice for you if you're somebody who knows eventually down the road you want to become a freelancer, you want to start your own agency, you want to work for yourself. I would recommend, if you can, and when you can, you can take breaks, of course, but keeping that sort of iron sharp, if you will, by taking on additional clients too, because it's going to give you more income. My last full-time social media job, I think I made around 65K, which isn't a terrible salary, but I was taking in an additional 20 to 25K a year by my freelance clients. So that brings obviously my income up to a much nicer, more comfortable place, but it also gives you a lot more experience. So when you do want to pivot, whether that is starting to pitch for clients and getting full-time freelance work, or even if you just want to move on to a different role, having more experience is never a bad thing. So for that freelance job, for the freelance clients that I did take on, I pretty much just used my website and my portfolio, and I linked my portfolio to my website. Also, LinkedIn was a big piece of that as well. I think LinkedIn is relevant for any of these job types, as is a website. I think having a website is a smart idea to house your portfolio for pretty much, anything that you want to do. So let's talk about the pros and cons of each of these job types, shall we? Let's start with freelancing. Freelancing is where I've landed. I've been full-time freelance in my business since 2019, so 5 years now. So clearly I've stayed here for a while. I've done well at it and I like it. I love it all days. I like it most days, let's say. So the obvious pros are that I work for myself, and that gives so much freedom and pride in what you do. I think owning your own business really is, it's a different beast. It is mine, which is great, but can also be stressful, which, spoiler alert, we'll get to the cons, but that is certainly one of the cons. But yeah, I mean, I have total control over my schedule, over my working hours, over my calendar, over my workload. If I'm feeling really burnt out, I can say, you know what, we're not taking on new clients this month. If I'm feeling really energetic, I can do all the things. So obviously that reflects in my income, which is not so much the case when you're working full-time or working at an agency, because you just get your paycheck kind of no matter what, unless you really drop the ball and, get in trouble or get fired, right? So that's an obvious con. But the other big pro of freelancing, I would say, is complete location independence in most cases. Now, you got to be strategic about this, because if you want to be location independent, meaning if you want to live in Florida half the year, in Michigan half the year like I do, or if you want to, spend 3 months in Europe this summer, well, you need to make sure that you are not setting the expectation with your clients that you are going to be coming in to take photos for them or meeting with them in person. And for me, that's been really, really easy. I've had clients from almost every single continent except for Antarctica. I've had clients from Europe, Asia, Africa, North America, not South America either, and Australia. So I've had clients from most everywhere in the world, and it is really easy with the internet nowadays to work wherever you want and to work remotely. Now, I already talked about the cons a little bit, but it is probably, out of all of these working styles, I would say the most emotionally challenging, because what you are selling is really so personal. When you own your own business, you take it very seriously. You really are invested in it. You care about it. You love it. You're passionate about it. And that can be amazing, but it can also mean that you're putting so much of yourself into it that sometimes it can be hard to find that work-life balance. And I don't think this is the working style for somebody who really loves to close the laptop at 5 p.m. on the dot and completely disconnect from work. Unfortunately, I just don't think that is a reality for most freelancers. I also think that freelancing can be hard to launch. As you see from my working timeline, I started out working for other companies and getting that experience under my belt. And I think that's why my transition was so seamless. I don't want to say it was completely seamless, but it was relatively easy for me to, pick up steam and launch a successful business, because I had so much experience and was so knowledgeable about the industry. But I think if I were to have just graduated college or, foregone college and wanted to start a freelancing business, it's definitely not impossible, especially in today's world, because I think, younger generations are so much more savvy about the internet than my generation was and previous generations. So it's definitely not impossible, but I do think it would have been harder to gain the skills needed to be successful, to make the connections I needed to be successful, and all of that. So it can be a slower growth trajectory. I'll also say one of the other reasons that I continue to work freelance is I make way more money than I have ever made in corporate. And by way more, I mean like 5 to 8 times more. So I do find that even though there may be a slower ramp up period for freelancing, I really don't know another job that I could work at this age. I'm 33 for context, where I am earning what I am. I would have to be in a higher level, director or VP or higher role to be earning what I earn as a freelancer. Okay, full-time in-house. So I think one of the things I loved about working full-time in-house was that I really got to know my brand so closely and so deeply. So again, I worked full-time at a corporate staffing company. And so I knew all kinds of things about the staffing company. I could talk to recruiters directly. I could Skype them. I could talk to people from other teams or other even teams on the marketing department. So like I had access to the graphic design team, the creative creative team, the copywriting team, the ads team. I eventually became the ads team, so I got to have all these conversations and really know the brand super, super well. What's challenging about working at an agency or as a freelancer where you're taking on multiple different clients is you have to somehow apply your skills to brands that you might not even know that well, or you might not have a lot of knowledge about. For example, when I was working at the agency and I was writing about senior living communities, I didn't even really know what that was, to be honest, when I first started that job. Same for CRM companies. I had no idea what that was. I had to do so much Googling, so much researching, so much asking my managers questions for clarity and understanding the messaging. Whereas when I was working full time for the staffing company, I knew it really well. I got an orientation, I could walk around the floor, meet people, and I could really stay focused and get good at staffing industry marketing. I briefly touched on this already, but the team environment is also something that I really loved about working in-house. I so miss just our, daily lunch meetups and just talking about business, talking about work, but also just talking about life and my coworkers' kids and what we did for the weekend and all that kind of stuff. I think it really does help with morale, and I think it makes it a lot easier to grow together and to help each other out when you do have a personal relationship as well. And even just beyond the personal relationships, I think that, again, having access to the SEO team and saying, hey, what are the search terms that you are using right now so that I can then, mimic that on social, or we can kind of collaborate and make sure that we're aligned. Because one of the challenges as a freelancer is I am only doing social media or whatever it is that I'm hired for. I'm not in control of the website. I can make recommendations from a social media perspective and say, hey, I think you guys should really improve your website or whatever, but I can't tell them what to do. So that can be very challenging as a freelancer and was less of a challenge in-house. Now for the cons. The cons, I would say the number one was that I felt like, and I don't mean this to sound arrogant in any way, but I had kind of worn out my welcome. I had kind of learned what I could have learned from that role. And obviously there is always, always, always more that you can learn. So again, I don't mean that to sound arrogant, but in my job, I felt like I had done as much as I could do without being completely stagnant most of the time. And, my managers did a good job of trying to get me additional experience and trying to, give me more things to do. But at a certain point, I was like, it just got really boring and repetitive. And I felt like I was no longer growing. And at that point in my life, 5 years ago, I was in that season, in that headspace of I want to get as much experience. This is my peak, you know what I mean, in terms of energy and opportunity. So I want to learn as much as I possibly can. Now, on the flip side, though, I will say that sometimes it can feel like there is more responsibility when you're working in-house. And this really depends. I always tell people, if you want to work for an in-house company, you even need to identify what type of company you want to work for. Because if you want to, let's say, get a job at your local pizza shop and they have 5 employees total and you're going to be the one marketer on the team, well, you are going to need to know more than just social media, whether you're applying for a social media management job or not. You're going to be expected to understand blogging and websites and SEO and all these different things. And no, that's not technically a social media manager's responsibility, but I do think the smaller the team is, the more responsibility you are going to have, which again can really be a pro or a con depending on where you're at in your career. Lastly, we've got agency work. So agency, the biggest pro of working at an agency, I would say, is the variety of projects. You're not going to get bored. You're not going to deal with that, oh my gosh, I've said this thing a million times. I've recycled this post a million times. I'm so bored. You're not going to deal with that so much at an agency. There's always going to be a new client signing on or that you can work on. There's always going to be a team member who needs help with something. So you're probably not going to get bored. There's also a lot of room for growth, I think, because an agency has so many different jobs. So you might get started as a junior social media copywriter, like I got hired as, and then move up to a social media manager, and then move up to a social media ads person, and then a social media director, or whatever that might be. And just like culturally speaking, just the vibes that I observe from my friends who work at agencies, at least in the cities that I live in, which are, decently sized metropolitan areas, I do notice that agencies are more willing to promote younger people than I think a traditional corporate Fortune 500 job is. Again, that's just my observation, that's just my perception. But, I knew a lot more directors who were 30 years old than I ever knew in traditional Fortune 500 corporate type roles. The biggest con, I think, for agencies are that they're high pressure. They are very, very fast paced. There are going to be times when you just have to get something done, and that might mean you're pulling an all-nighter. You are working until 9 p.m. You are taking your work home with you. It depends. Obviously, every company has its own different company culture, and I'm sure there are more slower paced, calm agencies, but that has never been my experience. I have always been like, hey, we've got this thing, this request from a client, this thing due to a client, and we need it done, and I just get it done no matter what that really means for me. And then similarly, I've also found that agencies tend to have higher turnover. The cool thing about my job at the corporate staffing company was there were people who had worked there since they were 18, 20, and they were in their 50s. And I actually really loved that because they brought a wealth of knowledge, and it also showed that that company was serious about taking care of their employees. They didn't just get rid of people because of one mistake. I remember, in fact, I actually had a huge mistake and I was so afraid that I was going to get fired for it, and I didn't. And I think they did look out for their employees. And I'm not saying, again, that no agencies do that, but they do tend to have higher pressure, have higher demand on them, and sometimes just need to move things along when things aren't working out. So, all that to say, what is the best working style? Well, I think it depends on you. I think it depends on, is work-life balance super important to you? Then I would say try to get a full-time in-house or a part-time in-house job. That's probably going to give you the most laid-back lifestyle within reason. If you are somebody who's like, I'm trying to soak up as much knowledge as I can, I'm trying to get really good at this, I want to be the best, in 5 years, I want to own a high-powered agency or be a thought leader in the space, then I would say try to get a job at an agency. You're going to get so much experience, you are going to learn so much, and it will be like basically going to college all over again. And if you're somebody who is already decently experienced and or you maybe have a lifestyle that makes it hard to commit to more traditional employment. So maybe you are retired from your previous career. Maybe you are traveling for family reasons or personal reasons, or, just because, you want to. Or maybe you have some health stuff going on where you maybe aren't able to or find it difficult to work a traditional full-time job, then maybe freelancing is for you. I found freelancing to be really easy to transition to with my agency and corporate experience. And so if you are also experienced in those things, I think it might be a good fit for you as well. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Which of these working styles are you most interested in looking towards? And I also just want to say that you can go back and forth. Again, I freelanced while I was working full time, and I am not open to a full-time role again. I am open to it if the right thing came along. So you can always go back and forth, and just keep that in mind. I think no matter what though, make sure that you are working on a solid portfolio, because a portfolio is going to be the thing that gets you in the door to any of these jobs. So again, click the link down below for a free resource on social media management portfolios. Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned for a new episode coming in a couple of days. Bye.